Welcome to Unhinged and Bumbled Up, where you can
join serial dater Phil,
that's me, and dating detoxer Liz,
that's me. Welcome to the world of online dating.
What can you expect in the Unhinged and Bumbled Up podcast?
Dating do's, don'ts and disasters.
What we and our guests would gladly chuck in the 2020 dating bin to be gone forever.
What real people really think about those tricky dating dilemmas.
Or some dating trivia. You'll never know when it'll come in handy for that pub quiz.
Top tips and tricks from our awesome guest experts who luckily know a little more about dating than we do.
So if you've ever had a dating disaster,
ignored the red flags,
or felt like your dating life was less successful than Bojo's hairstylist,
then you're in the right place. Do we know what we're talking about? No! Our dating lives are both utter shite. So join us as we talk all things dating. The good, the bad, and the sorry, there's just no spark.
So that was a bit different. Did anyone notice something that I didn't?
Oh, hi! I'm back again.
You're a few months early?
Yeah, so you did invite me to come back later on during my date for a year and give an update, but you know, last one seemed to go well. You couldn't wait for a second date. Here we are.
Don't tell everyone I'm so eager, yeah? No wonder I'm single.
You did not play it cool after the last podcast. It was like, Liz, it was great. When can I see you again to have you on the show again? Well, here I am 1 week later, so.
I mean, it worked, didn't it?
It did. Hello and welcome to the Unhinged and Bumbled Up podcast. I'm Liz, he's Phil, and today we are joined by Louise Johnson. So Lou runs a dating blog, Divorced and Dating at 30, and is also a best-selling author of her book, Lou Who? 2 Countries, 2 Names, Many Men, a memoir of self-discovery. This week we'll be talking about being separated or divorced when dating, and also a ton of other great stuff that comes up in Lou's book. Phil and I have both read the book this week and loved it, so we're really looking forward to Lou sharing some of her stories with us. So Lou, can you start off by telling us a little bit more about you, about your book, your Instagram account, and really what Lou Who is all about?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for reading the book. So I am Louise Johnson and started off writing a blog about the dating stories that I was accumulating as I started to get back into dating sort of post-divorce. And I had been married and divorced when I was in Scotland, where I'm originally from. I then moved to Canada, which is kind of where the book starts. And took a little bit of time to sort of do a lot of healing that I really needed to do, a little bit of work on myself, and then started dating. And, you know, I think it's fair to say it was a little bit of a gong show, or is a bit of a gong show. And there was just so much for me to learn and so many stories that came up, and just, my friends also were living vicariously through me. And so they all sort of kept saying, when are you going to start a blog? So the blog started, I started sort of anonymously posting on Instagram about the blog. And then from there, it was like, well, this needs to be a book. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. And the blog was just the dating stories, just the horrors, just the funnies, you know, really nothing else about me. And then when sort of time presented itself to write a book, I was like, okay, yeah, I can definitely see myself writing a book, but I didn't want it to just be the dating stories. There's definitely a place for those, but I was like, I felt like there was a lot more to that story of kind of the background and my divorce and kind of, you know, all the things that you go through after that. And so that was kind of where the book came around. And the blog as a result has taken a little bit of a backseat, but I am hoping to get back to that very shortly. There's still so many more dating stories to tell, but the book is that sort of 7 years or 6 years from when I made the decision post separation to move to Canada, and what that has looked like, and all the like dating stuff, of course, but there's a lot of stuff in there about mental health and physical health and just rediscovering myself, rediscovering my sexuality, like understanding relationships as well as like an adult trying to make new friends. Like not always easy. The guilt of moving abroad away from your family. Yeah, a lot of family stuff. So it touches on a lot. But that's kind of, you know, I wanted to share the stories. I felt like there was a lot that people could relate to, or I hoped that there was. I was pretty sure I wasn't the only one that was kind of struggling with a lot of that. And I think for me, I've really found that actually in being vulnerable, that is where I have learned the most and where I have felt the most authentic in amongst all of this that's happened. So that was kind of just something that I wanted to promote. And I feel like if more of us can be a little more honest about some of those struggles, we might all be in a little bit of a better place.
Totally agree.
And there was one of the things that I really loved about the book actually was how very open you were. I thought it was a really lovely, quite exposing. I can imagine it must have felt quite vulnerable to put it out there in the world, because you really are so honest and open about your experience. There's really no sugarcoating, there's no kind of dressing it up. And some of the dating experiences or the kind of fledgling relationships, I just felt like deep in the pit of my stomach while I was reading. I was like, oh, I've been here, I can feel this with you. And I love that openness.
Yeah, and it was really important for me. I didn't want to write the book and, you know, try and make me look like, you know, there wasn't a perfect arc to it. Actually, that's what I should say as well. If you read this book and are expecting that, like, at the end of it, you know, I'm remarried and like living this wonderful life, that is not it. That is not the story.
That's exactly what I was expecting. That's what I thought was coming of this. I was like, I'm going to get to the end. Do you know what? Reading it, I was like, yeah, this is going to be the one for it. This is going to be the one. And then I was like, no, there's so much of the book left. It's not going to be like that.
I know. And I felt like, especially there's one story just at the very end about a particular guy in New York. And I think that everyone was kind of reading that being like, this is it, this is the one. And no spoilers if you haven't read it. But, you know, I think for me as well, like I say, there was that feeling of, I kind of was like, yeah, I'll write the book when I get to that part, when I get to like, oh, there's this perfect ending. And when I spoke to the sort of agency, the self-publishing agency that I worked with to publish it, the owner, Megan there, said, she's like, but that's what makes it better. She's like, that's what makes it relatable. Like for those people that are still struggling, to not finish the book and be like, well, yeah, of course, now she's happy and she's settled, and, you know, all those things that we look at as measures of success in terms of being in a relationship. She's like, that makes it better. And it is true. I think it's one of those things where it was like, I need to be so honest. And if you come out of the book thinking that anyone is a dick, which you might, it should be, I should be the one that you almost question the most. You're like, wow, she is a fucking idiot. Like, why did you do these things? And that was really the thing for me as well. There's obviously a lot of guys in the book, and I was very conscious of the fact that it was not about tearing any of them down, or my dad or my ex-husband. There's a lot of people I really could have sort of, you know, gone in on, but I really tried to be very factual about what happened, but reflective of my experience of that. So not trying to offer even reasoning for what they had done. I could hazard a lot of guesses for a lot of the behaviors of men in the book. Yeah. But it's not my place, and that is not my story. My story is the effect that it had on me, the experiences that I had. And so that was what I tried to do in a very kind of honest and yeah, very, very open way. My mom was like, did I need to read all of those things?
I felt the same. I with this podcast and with the My Date for a Year blog, my mum reads and my mum listens to the podcast, and I had to do like a disclaimer, which is there will be some oversharing, and if you're going to read it, you're going to need to be prepared.
And that's it. There's exactly the same at the beginning of my book. And I say that because I clearly don't have a problem sharing the stories. But if you might have a problem knowing those, that is your problem. As my friend James says, as I quote in the book, that's a you problem. And because you can't unknow the things that you read. And so when colleagues of mine or my boss have said, oh, I'm going to read your book, I'm like, okay, but let me tell you that the next time we are in a meeting together, you're going to be thinking very different thoughts. So, yeah, it's like an uncomfortable place, but it's only uncomfortable for them. I don't care.
No, because you wrote it, you've lived it, and you're like, this is my story. Take it or leave it. This is me. This is what I've been through.
Exactly.
So a question all our listeners are going to be asking, you moved from Scotland, which is quite cold, rainy, to Canada. Why
Canada?
Out of anywhere in the world, why Canada?
Great question. Well, first of all, I will say that Canada, so I'm in Vancouver on the west coast of Canada, and probably what we typically know of as Canada is like freezing cold winters, like Arctic conditions. Well, Vancouver is not that. Vancouver is like this very weird microclimate bubble on the West Coast that gets 4 lovely seasons. We actually get nice summers, and we do get winters, but they're actually no colder than at home. And actually less rain than Scotland, but everybody in Vancouver thinks it rains a lot here. But the great thing about it is we do have snow, but it's like on the mountains. So it's you go to it and you can enjoy it, but then you come back to the city and it's like, it's fine. But Canada was because I grew up abroad. My family moved to Egypt when I was 7. I was there till I was like 14. So kind of being abroad and sort of, doing that thing was quite, it was something that I knew that I would probably want to do again as an adult. I thought it would have been with my ex-husband. That did not happen. And so when that sort of all came to pass, I was like, well, definitely time to move. And Canada came about as a result of kind of like, okay, I want to go somewhere English speaking. First of all, Egypt, obviously not particularly culturally easy, or especially not as like a, not if I was going there as a single adult woman, it would not have been a good time. So I was okay, culturally, like English speaking, where can I get a visa for as well? And at that point I was like 28. So time was thankfully on my side, because apparently 30 is a cutoff for you being accepted into a lot of countries. Who knew?
Absolutely past it at 30.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, no, I have nothing to offer your country anymore. So yeah, I was 28. So I just snuck in, and like I traveled a lot between school and university, and like Australia, I probably wouldn't have moved there. New Zealand, I definitely would have moved there, but it's so far, and the nearest Australia. So I was like, no, not really for me. Middle East, again, like single white women, no. The US couldn't get a visa for, and now I'm very glad that I couldn't get a visa for the US. But Canada, and that makes Canada sound like the last choice. It really wasn't. It was kind of always first choice. We'd had family out here when I was younger, when I was growing up. We had family in Toronto, and so it kind of was like, it seemed like an easy-ish choice. I will say there was a lot of cultural differences when I did get out here, but had never been to Vancouver. Had a friend who was like, oh, it's lovely. I spent a summer there once. You'll love it. And I was like, okay, researched it a little bit on the internet, Google Street Viewed it, booked a one-way ticket. I was like, what's the worst that can happen? We'll either figure it out or we won't, and we'll go back to Scotland and nothing will have changed. So I found myself, making home in Vancouver, and it's really lovely.
I must say that reading the book made me want to go to Vancouver. There's some really lovely stuff about the hikes that you go on and the places that you explore that you capture really well.
Yeah,
podcast trip, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, podcast trip. We're coming to visit.
Live shows. Let's go.
Yes.
So if we go back to the start of the book, obviously you talk about the kind of decline of your marriage, and eventual divorce. It's probably worth mentioning at this point that I am also divorced and that Phil is separated. So something that we can definitely relate to. But can you maybe tell us a little bit more about kind of your experience of that kind of end period, if you like, of your relationship, although maybe you didn't know that it was the end period at the time, and kind of how you felt going through that divorce period and kind of trying to get back into dating after that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting thing, and I think it's really truly only one of those things that you can understand if you've experienced it, and that's not to be like, oh, we're in such an exclusive club. I mean, nobody really wants to be in this club, but it is one of those things that I think from the outside looking in, and I remember thinking this about other people that were divorced before me, and I was like, wow, like, how do you even recover from that? Like, it just seems so mind-blowing. It seems so fundamentally life-changing, and I mean, it is, but I think I talked to this in the book, like, when you're going through it, the only thing you can do is to keep going, right? There's not really an alternative. And so you do just like one foot in front of the other, one day after another, of like getting through it. And eventually kind of things start to like brighten. But at the very end of my I guess my marriage in general was, I won't kind of spoil the details of the book, but the marriage was tricky from the kind of beginning. And there were a couple of occasions where it was like, okay, this could be it. I could be done with this. I could fully walk away from this. But one of the things I struggled with the most was that feeling, both personally and socially, that there was a responsibility on my part to like make this marriage work. And I think it's something that I feel so strongly about now, in terms of us having this really misplaced responsibility on us, that we should be staying in situations which are in fact toxic, which are in fact really detrimental to our health and mentally and physically. and yet still there is this feeling, this inherent feeling, because of the institution that is marriage and that everything that has been built around it. And even the weddings, like, you know, people often have asked me, you know, if you could have canceled your wedding, or did you know on your wedding day? And I didn't. I mean, if I'd known, I would never have gone. Well, I say I would never have gone through with it. But it's one of those things that on your wedding day, it's so huge. It's bigger than you at that point. Like, to then be like, I'm just gonna like slowly retreat. I think that takes such bravery and such balls. But so does going through with it, and so does kind of living that experience. And so it's one of those things where I just I struggle with it so much now because I see people struggling with that. But it was also one of the things which, for me, staying and kind of seeing it through in the way that I talked in the book on those multiple occasions where there was that kind of like, okay, reading it, you're like, okay, this has to be it. Like, she's gonna go now. This has to be. She's gonna leave finally. No, she's going back. Okay. And it's like, when you get to kind of that last time, I think at that point, I really was like, oh, I will die in this. Like, this will kill me if I stay. And just, you know, really understanding like the extent to which it had affected my mental health. But to get yourself out of that is like, I mean, I didn't really know where to start. And I think that was what I'd struggled with in those other times. I was like, well, how do I take that step out of there? Because, you know, it is your entire life. And it makes it sound like I had isolated myself. I didn't. I had a huge support network. My friends, my family were amazing. But I think it's very hard for people to understand the extent of anything that goes on in a marriage, good or bad, right? Like, and in some ways that's as it should be. We shouldn't be sharing everything. Having said that, when it is in such toxic situations, that can make it challenging, because then trying to like take that step, being like, okay, yes, I am going to break the bonds of my marriage. Which, I mean, what is it? It's a piece of paper, really. I mean, I know it's important. I know, you know, I got married in a church, and there's, you know, you're taking that vow in front of God, and I'm not taking anything away from the importance of that. But the reality is, if it's like your sanity or this thing called marriage, your sanity has got to win out every single time. And that is, I think, what I did not prioritize for a number of years in my marriage. And so then being able to kind of get to that point where I was like, no, this has got to be done, walking out, and then being like, okay, now what? Like, I don't even like, literally, now what?
Facts about dating.
This segment is called Facts About Dating, where we increase our knowledge slightly and learn a little fun fact about dating. We also ask the guest to find a fun fact. So, facts about dating. I think our new co-host should go first.
Okay, thanks, nominated. All right, so my fact about dating is, did you know that there was a 2015 study from the University of Alberta who found that couples who shared the housework had higher satisfaction and had more sex than couples who left all the housework to one partner? So if that is not a reason to look for somebody who is self-sufficient when dating, I don't know what is. Lou, what's your dating fact?
Did you know that Iceland has such a small population, and they all have, there's very few surnames, so it's very difficult. You've often got the same surname as someone that you might be dating, and so to try and minimize the risk of incest and that you would sleep with a relative, they created a specific dating app called Bump. And when you meet someone, you both open your app and you bump them together, and it will instantly tell you if you're related.
Wow,
That is amazing.
that is an amazing fact.
I'm glad that they figured out a solution for that.
Could they come up with an equivalent which just tells you if someone's a jerk? It would save a lot of time and heartbreak. Yeah.
Bump scan completed. Turns out he is a jerk and also your second cousin. So this week, my fact is from the future. And as from August 2021, you won't need a reason for divorce in England and Wales. I mean, currently it is... You have to be separated for 2 years with consent from your partner for you to be able to start divorce proceedings. Or without consent, it's 5 years. So these people who are separated, it's not a case of, oh, they want to still be married or anything like that. It's they're just waiting. They've got to wait because there's unreasonable behavior, but most of the time people aren't going to agree that they were behaving unreasonably.
I did. I was so desperate to get divorced, right, that I basically said to him, you need to file against me for unreasonable behaviour. My behaviour is unreasonable because I have left you and I am never coming back. So please write that down. And thus we shall proceed.
I mean, most people would argue it, and then it goes into court. And adultery, unless it happens, nobody's going to agree to it. So
if it's not the time thing, right? If that's what people are worried about, like, oh well, you know, how long could they still go back and those sorts of things? It's like, you could be divorced. You could have both decided and consented and got divorced within like so quick. But you could still be waiting for it if there's not that consent. So it's like, it's more just like the actual logistics of it. And I think that is, like you say, what people don't understand. Thankfully in Scotland, we were like a year was what I needed to wait. And I was like a year on the dot. It was like the paperwork was ready to go in the mail as soon as that day hit. And I was like, there we go. Thank you so much. But it is like, and that's the other thing that you don't think, well, yeah, why would you? You don't think about it until you have to go through it. And then it's like the legalities of it all. And yeah, just to add to like another painful situation. But again, it's just something that we judge people for that isn't necessarily meaningful or, you know, their fault or any indication of who they are as a person. But we love doing that, right?
Yeah, and I think you made a really important point, Louise, is this differentiation between whether it's a logistical hold up or an emotional hold up. And those are two quite different things that I think is really good to have a discussion about. And I think it's also a ton more complicated when there are kids involved. Obviously, you have to come up with arrangements about how you're going to manage the childcare. And obviously, I was okay with being labelled as unreasonable behaviour because I had nothing to lose. But if you have a child, you wouldn't want to be given that label. And I get that it's just a ton more complicated when there's a little person involved.
Yeah. Yes. Like me, I'm not the little person. No. I have a little person.
Also, it makes it sound like I'm talking about a midget. I mean child when I say little person, just to clarify.
My mini-me. Back to the questions.
Can you answer this?
Now we're back to the real reason why you're all here, asking our guests the questions and getting the answers.
And you talk quite a lot in the book about there's a period where you date quite a lot of guys in their 20s. And I really wanted to ask you about kind of to what degree you feel like there's a stigma about women in their mid-30s dating younger guys and how that's a double standard with genders. Like, that was really interesting for me, this kind of spell of 20-something guys who all sounded super hot, frankly.
Right, I'm not gonna lie. The funniest thing about that is I was just having this conversation this morning because actually one of the guys in the book has kind of sort of come back around, but it's 4 years, one of the 20-odd-year-old guys, but he's now, 4 years older. So he's, is that more age appropriate? I'm not sure. But we were talking about it this morning with my guy friends. And one of them was like, wait, so how old is he? And I was like, well, he's 29. He's not even 30 yet. I was like, well, he's 29. And he was like, oh God, Lou, I mean, and I was like, hold on. I said, how old was that girl that you last dated? And he's the same age as me. And he's like, 27. I was like, but we didn't say shit about that. And that is exactly it. It's just like, there's this feeling of, because I'm the older woman, then it's, I don't know. I don't know what it is that's fundamentally wrong with it, but there is just always that comment like, oh, and even from women, that's not to say that it's just guys that make the comment. It is, or like women are like, oh, you really like dating younger. And I'm like, it was never an intentional thing either. Like, I think I say that in the book. I didn't go after them explicitly. They just kind of fell in my lap and I wasn't mad about it.
See, I think what we found is a lot of it's to do with society and how society have said, this is how it's got to be. And I said in a post the other day that society says all these things, but at one point in time, society was like, a man can't love another man.
Exactly.
And, society, just fuck society at the end of the day.
That's like, if I could have named my book something else, it would have been that. Fuck society's timeline stuff. Like,
Yep.
honestly, I'm so sick of it in every single sense. And like, I just feel we're so bombarded with it. Everybody, especially with the, you know, being a woman as well, it just doesn't help because we also have the biological clock, which everybody loves to tell us about. And so, you know, I just feel like it is one of those constant sort of reminders. And I do have to be very conscious of like blocking that out and being like, we know that we've moved past that. We know that that's not our trajectory anymore. And like, that is fine. You know, I am personally comfortable with that, but it's other people that kind of have that problem with it. And so then there's just this sort of very subtle, very subconscious sort of pushing of that agenda. And I'm like, oh yeah, that still happens. Okay, great.
Yeah, and you have to call it out when you see it, but because it's infuriating.
It's the word. And even when it's my own friends, I'm like, what the fuck? And why are you bothered? Like, and actually then later in the car, we were going to play tennis. And on the way there, we had that conversation. On the way back, one of them was like, you're so freaking happy today. And I was like, oh yeah, it's that like kid that I'm dating. And they were like, hey, we don't mind it so much. I was like, yeah, I didn't think so, you know? And that's at the end of the day, all that anybody should be caring about is like, are you, and he's not a kid, just to be very clear. But, you know, it's like, are you happy or not? And I don't know why there's any other conversation around it.
100%. So there was something that really struck me in the book that obviously there's a lot of content which is not necessarily about the dating anecdotes per se, but what you actually learn about yourself from those dating experiences. And there's something that really stuck out for me around when you're talking about OP. So for listeners who haven't read the book yet, that's original Persian. So there's this guy called OP, and what you're talking about with what happened with OP is about consistency and about the fact that you go from something that is very intense to suddenly kind of drops off a cliff. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about kind of what you learned about the importance of consistency for you with dating.
Yeah, consistency for me, I always say like communication and consistency are two things that I just that is like they're turn-ons for me in terms of like how important they are. I'm like, if I have that in a relationship, I'm golden. But the consistency thing is interesting because I actually think for me it probably started as a little bit of control. And control often, as it certainly was for me, is like our trauma response. And so because you've had no control, typically you go the opposite way, which is exactly kind of the way I went, which was like you just, anything you can grab control over, you really like go all in with it. I then sort of in the work that I did with my therapist, learned to loosen that a little and like, yes, take control where it was needed, but kind of, you know, look more for consistency. Like you can still feel like there's control in consistency. And so that was kind of where that came to for me. And consistency just, it seems so easy. Like it seems like a really straightforward concept. It seems like that should be something that everybody should be able to offer. Yes, life happens, but with the best intentions, I'm like, why is consistency so difficult for people? And I say in the book about OP, I'm like, I don't need consistency of the intensity that we had. Like it was a lot. We saw each other for like after our first date for 10 days consistently. And that's not the consistency that I wanted. but it is that like whatever that consistency is that you start, if it is seeing each other every day, don't recommend it. But if it is, you can't then just let that change without there being some explanation offered or conversation had. The same way, like the other way, like if you've gone from being like once a week chatting to being like he's now messaging me every day, I kind of want to understand like what the shift was, right? Like are you now in love with me, or are you like going through something you need help? Like what is that? And so
and will it continue as well, like so you know what to expect? Exactly.
And I think that's then where like you become accustomed to whatever it is that you're seeing in front of you. And so then when that changes, that was really triggering for me, because that instability is just so reminiscent for me of my relationship with my husband, with my relationship with my father, where there just was such a lack of inconsistency and instability. And so it's just not something, it's not somewhere I can sit, it's not somewhere I can let myself be, is in inconsistency, because it just triggers so much from my past. And that is with me working on things, like that is with me feeling like I really have moved on from so much of it. But if that happens, I'm like right back there. It's like, oh, the world is falling. And so I just can't really afford to let that happen anymore. So, and I think for him, or for me in that situation with him with OP, it was just the most kind of the most significant example of that. And I do sort of say that in the book. Like, I feel like so many of those stories were really good, solid lessons of like things that I had to learn. And I think that for me with him, the consistency piece was it. That was that lesson.
So in the book, you mentioned gaslighting from your ex-husband and also Philippine, which what happened there?
Phil was yelling at the book in that section.
Massively. I was like, do you know what? Canadian guy, you saw Canadian DJ, you saw the red flag there. You was like, yeah, bye. Philippine. Yeah.
You know what's so funny is I kind of actually forgot how bad that story was until I was writing it. And when I was writing it again, I was like, oh my God, this was like outrageous. And so I knew that. And then when I published the book, Philippine is probably the story of, I mean, apart from like my ex-husband, who people have really gotten, like that has been the reaction, is like, what the actual fuck? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know, like really weird. But again, in the situation, if you don't know, gaslighting is basically someone it's a form of manipulation that somebody uses to make another person essentially question the truth and question their sanity, is essentially what it gets into. So for me, it was me saying to my ex-husband, look, I found all this stuff online that you've done, and you know, can you explain it to me? And rather than just saying, you know what, yeah, I've been a shit, or I'm not going to talk about it, he tries to tell me, and I won't go into the full details of how outrageous his explanation was for what I found on our computer, but you know, he basically just barefaced lied to me, to the point where, and again, it's one of those situations where when you're isolated in that relationship and it's just the two of you, especially with someone, the person that you love and trust the most in the world, if they're telling you that what you think is the truth is not the truth, and they're telling you that you've got it wrong, that you're insane, that you're unhinged, that you're, you know, all, you do start to question yourself, and you start to question your sanity, and you start to really not trust yourself. And that is why it's so cruel, because to break someone's own sense of self down to the point where they start to not trust themselves is so detrimental. And I think it's one of the things which can take the longest for someone to heal from. And so gaslighting is truly just so cruel. And people often do it. Some people do it knowingly. They know that they're gaslighting you, and they know that they want you to think that they want you to question yourself. And other people do it actually not necessarily knowing that it's gaslighting, but knowing that they don't want to acknowledge that you're right and acknowledge that the truth that you're saying is correct, because then it paints them in a bad light. And so that for them is like, oh, we'll just avoid and I'll just deny it. So it's kind of like denial in the most aggressive sense. And I just, for people that do it, I love kind of educating people on it as well, because a lot of people are like, oh, I've never known a name for that. I just thought it was someone just like continually telling me that I'm wrong. And I'm like, no, there is a name. It is gaslighting. It is a form of, you know, mental abuse. It is a form of emotional abuse. It is a form of manipulation. Narcissists do it a lot. There was another guy in the book who, more stuff has happened since the book, and that is a whole other story about gaslighting. And it's one of those things where when you can name it, I think it makes it so important as well, because then you're actually able to be like, I know that this is not right. Like, I know what you're doing. And as I said, actually recently in a post that I wrote, I was like, that doesn't mean that you get to stop it automatically. It's not that easy, unfortunately, especially if you're in a cycle of abuse, but it does mean that you can understand what is happening and therefore kind of not let the full effect take place. So when I've been gaslit since, and it doesn't have the same effect now because I know what it is, but it does still fuck me up, but I kind of don't start questioning my own sanity. I'm just like, this guy's an asshole. He's gaslighting.
Call it out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The 2020 bin.
This segment is called the 2020 bin, basically the Modern Room 101. Each week we'll be asking our guest to chuck something they hate about dating in the 2020 bin and give us a reason why.
Okay, so in this segment, Lou, we've asked you to share something that you think should go in the 2020 bin about dating, i.e. be gone forever, never to make an appearance. So already in the 2020 bin from last week...
You can't mention what's in the 2020
Oh,
bin.
can't I?
That's
Is it
the
top
rules.
secret?
It's gone. It's gone.
It's gone forever.
We
okay,
can't
so
mention
I'm
the
not...
word.
Okay, well then it would just be like a blind test to see if that thing comes up again with somebody else's preference. But yeah, so there's something already in the bin, but I can't tell you what it is because top secret. Tell us what you think should go in the 2020 bin.
Okay, so when I match with someone, or I meet someone, and before we go on our first date, trying to connect with me on social media, don't. Now, I'm not saying don't stalk me on social media. I would be lying if I said I didn't do that. But don't add me as a friend on Facebook. Weird. Don't start following me on Instagram, especially not if you have a private Instagram. I think that's just not right, because it just creates this real awkward thing after the fact where you're like, if it didn't go well, or it did, and you a couple of dates down and then it doesn't go well, there's just that like awkward unfollow stage. And I just think, just don't. Why? What did you get out of this? Like, why, why? Or especially when I did actually used to, before I have my public Instagram now, I used to have a private one. And so I was kind of like, it just felt like a bit of an invasion of privacy, wanting to come in. And so I'm like, just wait and meet me. It felt invasive. It felt too much. It felt too much too soon. Why don't you wait and see if you like me first? And if you do, sure, follow me on social media. Until then, please pretend like you didn't see it. I'll know you've looked, but pretend like you didn't see it.
It reminds me of that time early in the morning where shops open for like browsing hour. Like just wait till the shop is open and then come in and buy it, or don't come in and just have a look around before you're able to buy anything. No.
I think that I might be outvoted on this one because loads of girls ask me to follow them on Instagram.
I bet they do, try and get the followers up.
No. These are private accounts. And the thing is, I may still have quite a few people on Instagram that I either went on one date with or didn't actually end up going on a date. So, yeah.
Do you think there's something to be said for, like, you can get a lot more information from somebody's social media than you can from their dating profile. So there's been people who from their dating profile I've been like, yeah, cool, we could go on a date. And then I've looked them up on social media and been like, yeah, no, this is not happening. So I do think it gives you a bit more information. But I totally agree that afterwards you're like, well, what are we going to do now? Are we going to awkwardly watch each other's Instagram stories for the next year? No.
See, but then I feel Facebook's a step too far, because Facebook's like very, very, but Instagram, it's pictures. So if they've only got like a couple of pictures on the dating profile or only a few, you can see more. So maybe, what about putting Facebook in the bin but not Instagram?
The problem with Instagram, though, the counter of that is it's not real life anyway. We know that. So to base a decision on that as well is also not necessarily ideal. Plus, I feel like now you go to my Instagram and it talks about this book about all these men and guys are like, oh, what? No.
That is a fair point. That's a fair point indeed. Just wait.
Yeah.
So if it's going in the bin, then I'm sorry to all the people that I was following. I won't be after this podcast.
You're going to have to go do a cull.
I will. And then they'll be like, why have you called me? I'll be like, because Lou said so.
Yeah, I feel like that's made up my mind, to be honest. So I'm going to vote for it going in the bin. And I vote you, Phil, need to now, after we record this, go through your Instagram account and unfollow all the people that you went on unsuccessful dates with or didn't go on success. Just have a clean up. Just have a nice old spring clean of the old Instagram account.
I mean, I haven't got that many followers as it is. So.
You're going to be left with like 2 followers. It's all girls you've dated, right?
No, I've got a few guys on there. I've got a few guys.
What, you've dated?
No.
No judgment.
So yeah, we'll go through the numbers next week. I'll tell you what it started at and tell you what it finished at.
Good, and I will make sure you've done your homework. Okay, so it's agreed that connecting on social media prior to a date is going in the 2020 bin.
Thank you.
to the questions.
Where am I? Who are you people?
This is the final instalment of guest questions, so sit back, relax, and find out what else we've got to ask.
So where is Lou now in her life? And is there going to be a book 2?
Lou's real busy. So the book came out at the end of last summer and, you know, in the middle of COVID. So that was a real fun time. And I had started, so after I read the book, I went back to work full time. I have a job that is not writing about men. And so I work in marketing for a tech company. And that has just been, I'm very grateful that I've had a job throughout the pandemic, and I actually got a promotion at the beginning of this year, which is wonderful. But from a time to write perspective, it has really diminished that a little. So I'm missing the writing a little bit, but still trying to do as much of the book promotion and kind of talking about it. And like I say, I'm hopefully going to get back to the blog shortly. But yeah, otherwise just, you know, COVID has definitely changed dating. So I feel like there's a whole book about COVID dating. But there's definitely a book 2. I feel like there's, you know, I kind of did leave it a little bit on a cliffhanger with one of the guys. And there are many stories since this came out, which is actually only a year ago. People are like, you can't have enough to write about. Yeah, I'm like, oh, you should hear what I gotta say. So I would like there to be a book 2, definitely. But when that will be, I'm not too sure. So we'll have to wait and see.
During your book, you're an absolute pro at giving people nicknames. It's one of the things that made me laugh the most. And you kind of explain that actually having a nickname for somebody and not calling them, when you're talking with your friends, for example, not calling them by their real name actually helps with a sense of like detachment a little bit, or not kind of getting too invested. So you actually inspired me. And so this week, so obviously I'm not dating at all this year. I'm having a total detox. But I went through all my old, you know, you have like people in your phone who are like all have the surname Bumble or Tinder.
Yep.
So I went through my phone contacts and I've renamed them with nicknames in Lou style. And so I wanted to run them by you and see what you think. Okay.
Please. Oh my God.
Okay. So we've got Clean House Alex, String Along Charlie, danwantskids.com, Unavailable Tyler.
Oh God, classic. Of course it would be.
Classic. Adorable but not the one Joey.
Oh, those are sad.
Aren't they? Breadcrumb James. And last but definitely not least, Bad Personal Hygiene Chris.
Whoa. Wait. I'm calling her out on that one, because it isn't Bad Personal Hygiene Chris, is it? What is the true name that you sent to me the other day?
It's a little bit more specific than that. Mum, close your ears for a second.
Warning, if you're any relation to Liz, please close your ears now. Warning, if you're any relation to Liz, please close your ears now.
The original name, which I have made slightly more PG, was Dick Smells Like a Farmyard Chris.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to listeners who have just been put off their dinner, but
wow.
So now he's called Bad Personal Hygiene Chris. But you know, there's no fixing that.
Go back to the original name. You know, the more explicit the better. And also it'll really remind you not to go back there.
It's a big trigger. Like if I was ever thinking of texting him again, that was enough to bring back some bad memories and put me off. Gone forever. I had to kick him out of my house. It's a long story. He was rude about my cats. Don't be rude about my cats if you come around my house. It's just rude.
Especially not when you've got that problem going on downstairs.
I know.
We will be going into that story one day, by the way, Liz. We will have an episode especially for Dick Smells Like Farmyard Chris.
The time someone was rude about the cats.
So, on that about nicknames, let's go to
Scott or not?
This segment is called Scott or Not, a specially designed game for our guest Louise Johnson to see if she can spot her native accent or not.
Right, continuing on from Dub Smash Dude. Now, he put you off massively, didn't he?
Just a little, yeah.
Yeah. So Lou doesn't know about this game. So basically, what we've done is we've created Scott or Not. We have 4 people, and you've got to tell us whether they are real Scots or not.
Oh no.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I am. Let's do it.
Let's go.
And that to make it Scotland, although I've got my brilliant tartan Scotland football shirt for Euro 1998, I think it was.
Scott or not?
He's Scottish.
It's Scottish. 100%?
100%.
That is correct.
Hey!
On to...
I'm due my period in a week-ish. I thought we'd have a wee period chat, because it's been a while.
Scott or not?
I think she's Scottish.
That would be correct.
Also, am I the only one who wants to know what a wee period chat involves? I'm intrigued.
You can find it on YouTube.
Okay, looking it up.
Number 3.
Number 1 is Scottish people are incredibly venerable, so we feel like we deserve great respect because of
Scott or not?
Scott.
Oh, are you sure? You can change your mind if you want.
No, I think there was an inflection that I was like, yeah, you don't get that otherwise.
You're correct.
Yeah.
That's 3 for 3 so far.
3 out of 3.
Uh-oh, here we go.
It's day 4 of making a video every day. I don't know when I'm going to get sick of saying that it's day whatever day it is.
Scott or not?
I feel like I should say not, because I feel like maybe there should be one that's not, but it was very Scottish. We'll say they were all Scottish. We'll say it was Scottish.
So because we know how much you hate people impersonating Scottish accents, they are all Scottish YouTubers.
Yay!
There we go. You got it right.
No terrible Scottish accents on this show.
Do you know what's so funny is I don't know if you watched that show. I don't know what channel it was on at home. Behind Her Eyes. It was the guy in that's Scottish with the worst Scottish. I couldn't. And I'm like, I literally put it on my Instagram stories. I was like, why could they not have got a Scottish person to play this? And everyone here messaged me back and was like, oh, I didn't even realize he wasn't Scottish. And I'm like, that's fair. In fairness, it was a good Scottish accent. It was no Mel Gibson in
Braveheart.
But still, I was like, you just can tell. It really like grinds my gears. I'm like, enough. And then I know people are gonna comment like, well, you don't sound very Scottish, and don't get me started. Anyway,
Don't get
I'm
started.
so glad that they were all Scottish. I'm so glad I got them all right.
Yeah, we knew you would. We had faith.
Dating disasters.
This segment of the show is called Dating Disasters, because let's face it, we've all had them. Each week we'll be asking our guests to share their worst dating disaster, and we'll be sharing a dating disaster we've either received or one of our own.
So Lou, when we have a guest on the show, we always invite them to tell us a dating disaster. Now, we obviously have a whole book full of them here, but I wonder if you could share one for our listeners today.
I will. The one that always springs to mind, and it is in the book, is the day of 2 dates, which is when I learned that karma really will come and kick your ass, literally. And so this was like I was really getting back into dating at this point. I was like, oh, this is fun. And like, I'd started to reframe it for me. And I was like, I'm just going to go out and meet all these people, right? It's just like a game of numbers. Like, it's just like, let's get them through. And so, but apparently there's not enough hours in the week. And so for whatever reason, on a Saturday, I find myself with a coffee date in the lunchtime and a dinner date. And I was like, that's great. It's plenty of time. The coffee date was like an hour. Anyway, the coffee date was with a Brazilian guy. And at this point, I didn't drink coffee. I actually do now, but I didn't all those years ago. And we went for coffee, and at that point, I got quite nervous, like getting into a place, and it was like a busy coffee shop. And I was like, where is he? And like, so I just ordered the first thing that I saw on the menu. Like I look up and above the woman, and I'm like, oh, I'll take a macchiato. And she's like, oh, do you want that yeah, and she was like, okay, no worries. So I get a macchiato, which is like one of the strongest coffees I find out after. Have that. We sit down. He's very nice. I instantly know that like nothing's going to happen. But, you know, it was very nice to chat to him. He'd moved from Brazil. We had a lot to chat about. He said, would you like another coffee? And I'm like, sure, I'll take the same again. I had a macchiato. So I'm now on my second macchiato, which have like, I think they both have 2 double shots, right? So I'm now on like 4 shots of caffeine. Don't drink coffee at this point in my life. So really starting to sort of get the jitters. By the time he walks me home and tries to kiss me on the street corner, which I was like, please don't do that. I get home and I'm like, wow, I don't feel so good. Look, you know, yeah, my heart is racing, and I think I need to go to the toilet. So I find myself really not feeling very well at all, in the sense of like, we're now on the toilet and I'm thinking, okay, that they also took way longer or lasted longer than I had anticipated. So now I am shitting myself while getting ready to go to meet another guy on a date at a Mexican restaurant. Like, it's the last thing you want to do, the last place you want to go when you're already really having some trouble on the toilet. So anyway, where I lived, my apartment was on one corner. The Mexican restaurant was literally like over the other corner and up one. And there was a pharmacy on kind of like the diagonal corner. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go there first and get Imodium, and then I'll go over. And all I could think was, what if he sees me? I don't know why I was thinking this. I was like, what if he sees me and thinks that I'm going in there for condoms? And like, I make an assumption based. I was like, you have bigger things to worry about here, woman, than the fact that he might think that you bought condoms. So yeah, it was not my finest hour. And it was just a reminder that you shouldn't try and squeeze 2 dates into one day. It's not necessary. Karma or something else will start kicking your ass. And I did make it through dinner, thankfully, but I did very quickly run away from him as soon as we said goodbye, back into my apartment, and let myself really go. So that was worst day ever.
So Lou, with recording this, our first episode hasn't come out yet, but once Lou listens to our first episode, then there might be a pattern in all these dating disasters that are happening.
There seems to be a theme. I'm going to specifically request from the next guest that there is no stories which involve shitting oneself, ideally.
But isn't it funny that you're not alone in it?
No. Apparently happened much more than we think. And I can't believe that you thought it would be a bad thing that he thought you were going to buy condoms rather than knowing the truth. Surely him thinking that is better than thinking you've actually got a problem.
I was like, wow, okay, no, those were early days. And actually that dinner was the very first date with Dub Smash, dude. So should have just cancelled it. Should have just given that a wide berth.
You wouldn't have got those videos through. The boys are back in town or anything like that.
They still haunt my memory. My memory.
Great. So thank you for that, Lou. Love another shit story. What's not to like?
Final thoughts.
This segment is called Final Thoughts. Basically, we take a look back at the episode and we each pick something that we'll take away from it or something that we have learned.
Okay, Lee, so thank you so much for coming on today's show. And we've reached the point where we are reflecting on our kind of main takeaways for today's episode. So I'd love to invite you to give a kind of takeaway or something that kind of you'd like to leave our listeners with today.
Yeah, I think given all of our situations, we've been talking about this lovely little club that we're in. I think when it comes to divorce, particularly in terms of going through that and the experiences that come with it, I think it is something that we need to give ourselves a lot of grace for. I think it is so much more complicated often than just the end of a relationship, because as we were just talking about, the logistical piece, the legal piece, there's so much attached to it. And I think sometimes it's like you talk about it as a failed marriage, and so it's almost like, okay, well you move on from it, but there is so much that the nuances of it as well. I'm sure each of our experiences are so incredibly different, and so I always say I try not to give advice because the only thing I'm an expert in is my own life. And so it's really just to kind of, if you haven't been through the situation, really to try and be as empathetic to as possible. And if you have, then I'm sure, as we all are, we are so aware of how challenging it is and how different that can be. And every situation has such a different set of challenges that you have to go through from it. So I think that for me is like really just appreciating the divorce piece of like not this like horror of like a societal shame, but it's actually this really complicated, nuanced trauma that people experience.
100%. I think that's really powerful. For me, final thoughts. There's something for me about when I read your book, each dating example or anecdote is characterized by what you learned about yourself from it. And I think what is interesting to do is if I looked back on my own dating experiences over the last 9 months since the breakup or further back than that, is to think, okay, if I were going to write down that anecdote in a book, what is the takeaway for that chapter? What is the thing that I learned about myself in the process? And it becomes less about the quest to find the one, whatever the hell that is, and more about this iterative process of learning about yourself and what you value and appreciate and need in relationships.
Yeah.
Phil, how about you?
My final thought, because you both stole my answers, is I'm going to start doing more housework because they get better sex. And yeah, I've got to say goodbye to a lot of people tonight, haven't I?
You have. Let the Instagram cull begin. Your followers is going to be so measly at the end of this. 2,
my mum and you.
Brilliant. Maybe some of the guests that are coming on the show for the rest of the series will do you a favour and follow you to sweeten the deal a bit.
Just to say, oh yeah, I can't have any dates on there ever again. So, yeah, not as popular now, am I, Phil?
Don't seem to be. Good. So Lou, again, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experience with us, and for the beautiful but brutal honesty that you shared in your book. For our listeners, can you tell them where to find out a bit more about you or where they can follow you?
Yeah, of course. So I have a website, louisejohnsonauthor.com. You can go on there, read about the book. You can order the book there. It is also available on Amazon, both in the UK and around the world. It's available on Kindle and Kobo as well, if you're an e-reader type person. But mostly I am very active on Instagram. Mostly my personal account, which is _Louise_Johnson_, all the underscores. I share a lot about the book stuff on there and my personal life, not so much the dating. I do try and do that a little bit after the fact, just for people's privacy's sake. But you can also see all of Vancouver on my stories, so come and check that out. And then I do have the Divorced and Dating at 30 blog and Instagram as well, which will be reincarnated in some form in the next few weeks, so look out for that also.
Good. I've got one final thing that I need to ask. If there is anyone living in Vancouver who is Lou's type, then please get in touch with us, because we are going to do the vetting first. We are team dating right here, and yeah. There we go.
Send them on over for some screening. And also I'm going to start working on this like bump app for jerks. There's got to be some legs in that.
Has to be. Yeah, you work out if someone is a douchebag by their last name.
As soon as you hit it, it's like, bye, gotta go.
Yeah, alarm.
Like an alarm goes off.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. I have loved this chat.
You are completely welcome.
Fantastic guest. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank everyone for listening. If you'd like to get in touch, then you can do, whether that's to submit a dating disaster, ask a question, or ask for some advice. We're not that good at helping, but one of our guest experts will certainly be able to. So if you'd like to get in touch, head on over to our socials.
On Facebook and Instagram, it's @Unhinged and Bumbled Up.
On Twitter, it's @BumbledUp.
Or by email, it's unhinged.and.bumbledup@gmail.com.
If you liked the episode, then please don't forget to like and share and click the follow button above.
See you all next week. As always, thank you for listening that little bit longer. Next week, we won't have a guest, but it'll be me and Liz speaking about the subject of dating with children. So if you're a single parent who is dating and finding some difficulties, or someone who's dating someone with a child or children, then please get in touch. We'd like to know all about it and see if we can help. See you all next week.
.com.